Now, the government, in a surprisingly rapid U-turn, went from dropping the conversion therapy ban altogether to bringing it back, but only for LGB people, not for transgender people. Well, Dehenna Davison, the Conservative MP for Bishop Auckland, joins me now. Dehenna, thanks for coming into the studio to talk about this. It's obviously a very tricky time for the government. There's been a lot of backwards and forwards and U-turns and half retractions of U-turns. What on earth is going on inside number 10?
I wish I could give you a solid answer on this one, Tom. I mean, just to go back a step, it was in the Queen's speech that we would legislate to ban conversion therapy. I think we'd all assumed that it would be going ahead. So to see that leaked document that said it was going to be scrapped was really, really frustrating, particularly for some of us who've been campaigning on this for a really long time. There was clearly a huge kickback. I know I was one who was writing to the Prime Minister and the Whip to say we absolutely must change our mind on this. We need to go ahead with banning conversion therapy, which led to a very rapid U-turn. But as you say, it was only a kind of partial U-turn, saying that the sort of banning of trans conversion therapy is going to be stripped off and looked at a later date, which I consider to be a major mistake.
Now, there are voices within number 10. There are voices within the Conservative movement more widely who say that transgender conversion therapy isn't the same as LGB conversion therapy, that actually people need to be given space to speak through, to talk through. It's a more life-changing decision, sometimes an irreversible decision, to go down the transgender route. Do they have a point, or are we discussing the idea of conversion therapy, a ban on conversion therapy, as if there are no safeguards there at all?
Well, I think this is the thing. There are legitimate concerns around counselling for people who have genuine gender dysphoria, and we need to be very aware of that, but also be very aware that banning conversion therapy would not stop that from being able to go ahead. People would still be able to access those talking therapies to get the support they need, particularly younger people, because we know that a lot of people who struggle with sort of gender identity do tend to be younger, and kind of coming to terms with that can be really difficult. And yet you look across the world at other nations that have banned conversion therapy, and as you said earlier when you were speaking to Paul, we are an outlier. We are an outlier for stripping off trans conversion therapy and kind of not including that. So clearly there is a way to make this work that means that younger people in particular are protected, can access the support that they need if they're struggling with gender dysphoria, but whilst also banning some of these horrific, abhorrent practices that we actually see coming through in conversion therapy.
It's remarkable because explaining it there, it sounds very clear. A ban on conversion therapy for transgender people is not banning those kind of talking therapies that you and I are discussing, and that clearly are necessary for people who are questioning their gender. No one wants people to be pushed down one route or the other.
Absolutely.
Why do you think that message hasn't got through? Are there nefarious actors here, or do people simply not take the time to understand the issue?
I think at the moment there is a huge debate going on around the sort of trans issue. We see things like elite sport, we see things like same-sex spaces and whether trans people should be able to access those spaces. And I think, unfortunately, this is all conflating into a very kind of heated debate when actually what we need to do is take the heat out of it and look at the situation for the actual facts. And it's a very complicated area. You know, we have the CAS review going on at the moment looking into gender dysphoria and treatment for young people who are trying to access hormone therapies. That's one thing that's going on. We do have these discussions around whether trans people should be allowed to compete in elite sport and whether they should be able to access same-sex spaces. And I think it's all getting caught up in this kind of hubbub of concern and outrage. Also the woke war as well, which unfortunately seems to get this pulled in without taking into account that these are human beings at the heart of this who are being affected by it. So I really do hope we can all just take a breath and have a really sensible, logical discussion, looking at the facts, and finally get this ban in place, because it's been 4 years in the making since the government said they were going to do this. And a ban on conversion therapy means a ban not just for LGBT people, but for trans people too.
Now, your party, the Conservative Party, has had a mixed history on LGBT issues, but certainly within the last decade or so, it has had a relatively proud record. Equal marriage was a particular, I suppose, triumph of the Cameron administration. Looking at where things are now, particularly with your colleague, Jamie Wallis, the first trans MP to come out just last week, is there not an opportunity here for a particular Conservative message to come through on this issue? Rather than viewing each block as sort of identikit, it must be one way or the other, viewing people as individuals and saying, rather than banning all people from one space or forcing everyone into one space, taking a look at the particularities of each case as it happens. Is there an opportunity here for an individualist Conservative message to win out against both of the extremes on either side?
Well, I think you're right, Tom. And you mentioned there the fact that our party was the party that finally introduced gay marriage, same-sex marriage, which is, I think, one of the biggest triumphs. Because one of the reasons I joined the Conservative Party is because I believe in individual liberty. It's about giving people the freedom to live their lives the way they want to live it, without state interference, as long as they're not encroaching on other people's rights. That is why I'm a Conservative, one of the key reasons there. So absolutely, there is an opportunity here for us to continue selling that message and flying the flag of liberty. And it's why it's so frustrating to me to see that now we seem to be kind of factionalising on this issue, whereas actually everyone I know who is a Conservative does believe in that underlying principle. It's just the way that it's coming out isn't always unified.
Absolutely, and I think that point there that you raise in terms of unless it encroaches upon other people's rights, because it is fair to say that there are groups who do feel like their rights are being encroached upon around this issue, whether fairly or unfairly. I think that one particular example is, of course, the university swimmer in America. I think it's quite remarkable that we have to focus on an American example because there are no such examples in the UK that seem to be particularly pertinent at the moment. Do you think there is a point there? And in some of these areas, clear rules have yet to be arrived at.
I think it's about finding that middle road. And as I said before, unfortunately, these debates do tend to get very heated from both sides, and there always is a middle road to be found. Being able to respect both sides' arguments, but respecting the fact that there are individual human beings involved here. You know, the Leah Thomas case, the transgender swimmer in question, one of my key thoughts was how blooming awful it must have been for her to have so much, not just national, but international scrutiny on her when she should have been celebrating winning this victory. But you can understand why people are kind of concerned, particularly on elite sport, but also same-sex spaces as well. And I know that the Equality and Human Rights Commission made a ruling earlier this week on that particular point, saying that there could be opt-outs for services such as domestic abuse services, etc., where single-sex spaces can be protected. So there is a way to find that middle road. But as I said, we need to suck the heat out of this debate, all sit down and have a really sensible discussion about finding that pragmatic way forward.
And of course, viewing people as individuals rather than as groups could
Quite
well be the path there. Dehenna Davison, thank you so much for coming in and talking through that really, really important issue there. I really appreciate your time this afternoon.